When we talk about true crime, we often think of murder mystery and the monsters who walk among us. But what if I told you there's another kind of crime, one that happens quietly in brightly lit hospital rooms, behind sterile curtains, under the banner of medicine and modern progress? What if I told you that for centuries, women's voices in childbirth have been silenced, their pain dismissed, their trauma buried beneath the phrase, "At least the baby is healthy"? This isn't just history, it's still happening. Today, I want to take you on a journey not through one single crime scene, but through decades of systemic harm, through the stories they never taught us in school, the deaths that didn't make headlines, the silence that echoes long after the baby's first cry. This is a different kind of true crime story, one where the victim survives, but is never quite the same again. Chapter 1: Introduction. It was supposed to be beautiful. You know, growing up, I always thought childbirth was supposed to be one of the most beautiful things a human could experience, like it was the ultimate symbol of love, strength, and creation. I mean, even in cartoons or movies, the baby cries, everyone cheers, and somehow the woman looks magically peaceful 5 minutes later. But nobody tells you what really happens. Nobody tells you how messy it gets, how terrifying, and sometimes how deadly. I started thinking more seriously about this after a friend of mine gave birth last year. Everything seemed fine: healthy pregnancy, decent hospital, good doctors. But within 48 hours, she was back in the ER hemorrhaging. She almost died. And the scariest part? It wasn't some rare medical condition. It was a routine complication that should have been caught earlier, but no one was listening to her. That's what shook me. We live in a world with smartphones that unlock with your face and cars that drive themselves. Yet somehow childbirth is still killing women. And not just in remote underserved areas, right here, in major cities and modern hospitals. Women are bleeding out, being ignored, being misdiagnosed, being gaslit. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized this isn't new. This isn't just a healthcare issue. This is a historical issue. Because the way we treat women during birth, the pain, we dismiss the choices, we take away the voices, we silence. This has been building for centuries. Buried under scientific progress, hospital walls, and cold clinical language is a dark history most people have never heard about. But it's always been there, so today we're digging it up. We're going to trace back through thousands of years, rituals, midwives, empires, egos. We're going to meet the people who shaped how birth is handled today, some who helped save lives, and others who caused unimaginable harm in the name of control. This isn't just a story about babies being born. It's about the systems that failed mothers and how those failures still echo today. Let's start at the beginning. Chapter 2: The stat that changed everything. The thing that really stopped me in my tracks, like made me sit there in silence, was this one statistic I came across. According to the World Health Organization, every 2 minutes, somewhere in the world, a woman dies during pregnancy or childbirth. 2 minutes. Let that sit with you for a second. That's 30 women in the time it takes you to get through your lunch break. That's hundreds every day, thousands every month. And we're talking now, not the 1600s, not medieval Europe. Now. I don't know about you, but when I first read that, I assumed it had to be in places with no access to hospitals or medical care. Right? But no, it's everywhere. It's happening in places with modern hospitals, with trained doctors, with the best technology available. It's happening in the United States. And that realization hit me hard, because for so long, we've been told that medicine has come so far. That childbirth, while intense, is no longer the terrifying gamble it used to be. We have machines that monitor fetal heart rates, drugs to manage pain surgeons trained for every complication. So why are women still dying? And not only that, but in some places, maternal death rates are actually rising. That should be impossible, right? With all the advancements we've made. But it's not. And it's not because of lack of innovation, it's because of something deeper. Something broken in the system. A system that doesn't always believe women when they say something's wrong. A system that dismisses pain, delays care, and still after all this time treats pregnancy like a one-size-fits-all condition, instead of the incredibly individual, nuanced experience that it is. That's when I started to wonder, has it always been this way? Have women always had to fight this hard to survive something that's supposed to be natural? Did people care more in the past or less? And how did we even get to a place where bringing life into the world could be so deadly? That's what this story is about, because maternal mortality isn't just a medical problem, it's a historical echo, a reflection of how much or how little we've ever truly valued women's lives. And when you go back, you start to see that this isn't some modern failure. It's part of a pattern, one that stretches back thousands of years. And it didn't start with hospitals or doctors. It started long before that, with rituals with midwives, with fear, and with the earliest attempts to understand what childbirth really meant. So let's go back, way back, to the very beginning, because to understand how we got here, we have to understand where we started. Chapter 3: Rituals, Graves, and Ghosts of the Womb. When I started digging into the origins of childbirth, I thought I'd find some ancient wisdom, maybe some earthy spiritual practices that connected women to nature, or something poetic like that. But what I found was something else entirely. Turns out, for most of human history, childbirth wasn't seen as sacred or beautiful. It was terrifying, it was dangerous, and most of all, it was unpredictable. No one really understood what was happening inside a woman's body so naturally. They filled in the gaps with fear, superstition, and rituals that now sound completely unhinged. And honestly, I get it. If you think about it, early humans didn't have ultrasounds or fetal monitors or prenatal vitamins. All they had were screams, blood, and the hope that both mother and baby would make it out alive. And that hope wasn't always enough. There's actual archaeological evidence that shows just how traumatic birth was even thousands of years ago. Researchers found Neolithic female skeletons, so we're talking 10,000 to 2000 BC, and you know what they noticed? Stress lines. Literal stress etched into their teeth, like tree rings for trauma. These lines told a story of chronic physical stress, often from pregnancy and childbirth. And it wasn't just physical, it was spiritual too. Women prayed, not just in the way we might today, but like really prayed. They offered sacrifices, wore charms, whispered incantations, because they knew what was coming, and they were scared. One of the strangest rituals I found comes from the ancient Anglo-Saxons. It sounds like something out of a horror movie. They believed that to avoid a hard birth, or worse, a stillbirth, a pregnant woman needed to do something unconventional. She had to dance. Not just anywhere, though. She had to dance across a grave. Specifically, the grave of a dead man. And if that wasn't weird enough, the ritual also involved a living man, usually her husband, lying down on the ground nearby. She would step over both bodies, repeating a charm as she danced. The symbolism, life and death. By stepping over death and into life, they believed the mother would be protected, or at least less likely to die? I don't know. It sounds bizarre, but in a world with no medicine, no control, and no second chances, rituals were all people had. And honestly, it broke my heart a little, because behind every strange dance or charm or grave-stepping ceremony, there was a woman, probably young, probably scared, just trying to live, just trying to get through one of the most painful, dangerous moments of her life without dying in the process. It made me realize how much of childbirth, even back then, was about survival. Not celebration, not even motherhood, just raw, primal survival. And the more I looked into it, the clearer it became. Childbirth wasn't just a personal experience. It was communal. It was sacred and terrifying all at once, and it wasn't something a woman did alone. She had others with her, sometimes gods, sometimes ghosts, sometimes other women whispering prayers beside her in the dark, but never ever alone. That's what struck me most about these early records. For all the fear and superstition, there was still a sense of support, of sisterhood, of collective care, something we've lost maybe along the way, because now we have medicine, we have machines, we have sterile rooms and surgical teams, but somehow so many women still feel alone, still feel unheard, still feel like they're just rolling the dice, hoping to make it out the other side. And it's not just ancient history, it's a mirror. So the next time someone tells you that childbirth has always been this way, remember, these women have always known how dangerous it was. But they also always tried to make it safer, sometimes with rituals, sometimes with each other, always with hope. And honestly, in a strange way, I think those women dancing across graves might have understood something we still haven't figured out. That birth isn't just a medical event. It's life-death mystery and resilience all tangled into one moment. And that is where our story truly begins. Chapter 4. The Midwives' Mothers of Survival. If there's one thing that became crystal clear to me while researching childbirth throughout history, it's this: women have always shown up for each other. Long before hospitals, before surgical teams, and sterile gloves, there was the midwife. And I'm not talking about some side character in history books or a soft background figure in white linen. I'm talking about women who carried life and death in their hands. Women who were called day or night to be there when another woman's body cracked open to bring someone new into the world. Midwives weren't just helpers. They were everything. And the word itself says it all. Midwife comes from Old English mid meaning, with and with meaning woman, literally with woman. That alone gives me chills. Because for so long, childbirth was something that women did together in quiet rooms behind closed doors. There were no men, no outside interference, just a woman giving birth, surrounded by other women who understood. It was a private, sacred space. Midwives were trusted not just to deliver babies, but to guide mothers through pain, through fear, through blood, and screaming and joy and grief. And they did this without modern tools, without textbooks, without degrees. Just experience, intuition, and a kind of bravery that I don't think we talk about enough. A lot of them were older women. They'd already had children themselves. So they didn't just know what to expect, they'd felt it. They'd lived it. That made their knowledge personal, not just practical. When they said you're going to get through this, they meant it. What blew my mind is how far back this role goes. We're talking thousands of years. In ancient Egypt, in Greece, in Rome, in sub-Saharan Africa, every culture had its version of the midwife. And while their methods differed, the purpose was always the same: protect the mother, bring the baby into the world safely, and restore balance. There's this ancient Egyptian medical text called the Ebers Papyrus, dated around 1500 BC. It's basically a massive guide to herbal medicine and healing, and there are entire sections dedicated to childbirth. One recipe for encouraging milk production: warm swordfish bones in oil and rub it on the mother's back. Which, okay, sounds strange now, but it tells us something important. People were trying to help, trying to ease the process, even if they didn't fully understand how everything worked. And midwives weren't just about herbs and charms. In many cultures, they were deeply skilled in manipulating the baby's position during labor, helping the mother breathe, shift, squat, whatever it took. They knew how to respond when labor stalled, how to stop bleeding, how to deliver twins, how to wrap a newborn and cut the cord with nothing but a sharp shell or a handmade blade. There's even historical evidence that some midwives were highly respected professionals. In ancient Rome, there was a woman named Scribonia Attis. She was so successful as a midwife that she earned enough money to pay for a grand tomb, not just for herself, but for her entire family. That kind of wealth and honor for a woman in that era was rare, almost unheard of. But she wasn't a princess or a noblewoman. She was a birth worker, and people trusted her so deeply that they paid her well and remembered her for centuries. There's a sculpture on her tombstone that still survives. It shows Scribonia in the middle of a delivery. She's seated on a stool, hunched forward, hands reaching between a laboring woman's legs. Another woman stands behind the mother, holding her upright in support. It's intense, raw, intimate. And Scribonia is staring right out from the stone like she's looking straight at you. Not ashamed, not hidden, seen. But even with all that skill, being a midwife came with huge risks. Because when something went wrong, and let's be honest, it often did, people needed someone to blame. And in the absence of modern explanations, midwives were easy targets. If a baby was stillborn, or a mother died in labor, rumors could turn fast. She used a bad charm. She angered the gods. She's cursed. Some were accused of witchcraft. Others were imprisoned. Some were executed. That blew my mind. These women were dedicating their lives to saving others, and yet they could be sentenced to death if nature didn't cooperate. That pressure must have been unbearable. And then there was the gender issue. Because midwives were women helping other women, they were considered less than the rising field of male medicine. As male doctors began to emerge, especially in Renaissance Europe, they dismissed midwives as ignorant, superstitious, or worse, dangerous. Never mind that midwives had been delivering healthy babies for centuries without sterile instruments or hospitals. Never mind that midwives knew how to listen, how to comfort, how to adapt. They weren't men. They weren't trained in Latin. They weren't part of the academic elite. So they were pushed aside. But here's the thing that stuck with me the most. Even with all the obstacles, midwives never really went away. They kept showing up, quietly, consistently, because women kept needing them. Still do. There's something powerful about that, about women preserving knowledge not through textbooks, but through generations, through watching, doing, failing, learning, and passing it on. And maybe that's why their history has been so buried. Because when women carry power, especially silent, ancestral, resilient power, it scares people. So they rewrite it or erase it. But the midwives were there. And they're still here, maybe not always in title, but in spirit. In the doula who advocates for her client in a chaotic hospital. In the grandmother who whispers breathing techniques she learned 60 years ago. In the friend who shows up with soup support and the truth you are strong and you're not alone. That's what midwives have always offered. Not just medical care, but something deeper. Presence. And in a world that still doesn't always believe women, that kind of presence is priceless. Chapter 5. When men took over. You know, for a long time, birth belonged to women. It happened in women's spaces, surrounded by women's hands, women's voices, and women's wisdom. And then, like so many other things in history, men decided they wanted in. And not just to help, they wanted control. The turning point came gradually, but one story always sticks out in my mind. It's bizarre, disturbing, and honestly it says everything about what was about to change. In 1522, in Hamburg, Germany, there was a physician named Dr. Wirth. At the time, childbirth was still considered strictly women's business. Men weren't allowed in the room, not even doctors. If you were a man, you didn't get to witness a birth. Period. But Dr. Wirth was curious. Too curious. So one day he disguised himself as a woman dressed up like a midwife and snuck into a birthing room just to watch what happened. Now imagine the audacity of that. A man pretending to be a woman, just so he could be present in a moment that wasn't meant for him. That wasn't about him. Eventually someone recognized him, and it didn't end with a slap on the wrist. No. He was dragged out into the public square and burned at the stake. I know. It's extreme. But that punishment wasn't just about him. It was a warning. A clear message: this space is sacred. This space is not yours. But the warning didn't stick. Because not long after, the door to that birthing room started to open wider and wider. And it wasn't women walking in, it was men. And these weren't midwives, these were barbers. Yes, barbers. As in haircut and shave. Those barbers. It sounds ridiculous, but it's true. Back in the Middle Ages, surgeons weren't part of the academic medical world. Surgery was considered too dirty, too bloody, too hands-on for doctors. So the job went to the people who already had sharp tools and steady hands, the barbers. They cut hair, they pulled teeth. They amputated limbs. And eventually they were called in for complicated births. That's how we got the barber surgeons. They weren't trained in the art of childbirth the way midwives were. They didn't know how to read a woman's body or understand her rhythms. But they had one big thing going for them: tools, blades, force. And that made them valuable, especially in emergencies. If a baby got stuck or a mother couldn't push anymore, people started turning to the barbers. Because while a midwife might know how to shift a baby's position with her bare hands, a barber surgeon could cut. He could extract. He could do something. And in a world where fear ruled everything, people started seeing that as power. This is also when we start seeing the rise of a new figure, the male midwife. Sounds like a contradiction, right? But suddenly men were entering the field they were once banned from. And they weren't just entering, they were redefining it. One name you'll see a lot is Peter Chamberlain, actually two of them. A father and son, both named Peter, who worked as male midwives in England during the 1600s. They're best known for inventing the forceps, a metal instrument shaped kind of like oversized tongs used to grip the baby's head and pull it out during labor. Now, in theory, that invention saved lives. But in practice, it also started something dangerous, because the Chamberlains kept their invention secret. For 100 years, their forceps were a family trade secret. They'd carry them around in a box covered hidden from view, refusing to share them even with other doctors. They made their money on exclusivity. Imagine that, holding the key to safer births and choosing to keep it hidden for profit, and of course the midwives. They weren't even allowed to use the tool, not because they weren't capable, but because they were women. And by then, women weren't allowed to perform medical procedures. They weren't allowed to use instruments, not even on other women. So now you had male midwives equipped with tools and protected by law, competing directly with the women who had been doing this work for generations. And slowly but surely, midwives were pushed out. But it didn't stop there. Around this time, a French physician named François Morisot took things a step further. He published a book that would change the way women gave birth, not because it was safer, but because it was easier for the doctor. He argued that women should give birth lying on their backs. Now think about that. For thousands of years, women had been squatting, standing, kneeling, using gravity, using movement, listening to their bodies. But Morisot said no. Let's put them flat on their backs, legs up, still, passive. Why? Because it gave the doctor a better view. That's it. It wasn't about the mother's comfort. It wasn't about safety. It was about convenience for men, and people bought into it, especially when King Louis XIV of France got involved. Legend has it he had a bit of a voyeuristic interest in childbirth. He didn't like the traditional birthing stools because they blocked his view, so he championed the lying down method too. When a king says, this is the new way people tend to follow. And just like that, centuries of female-centered birth practice started to unravel. What once was about movement support and intuition turned into something clinical, static, and male-led. Women went from being participants in their own births to being patients, objects on a table, bodies to be managed. And that's what really gets me. This wasn't just a change in who held the tools, it was a change in philosophy, a shift in power. Birth stopped being about women and started being about control. And that shift is still with us today, because so many of the decisions made back then for profit, for ego, for spectacle, have shaped the way we experience childbirth now. Lying on your back, hooked up to monitors, surrounded by strangers, rushed through labor on a timeline that fits the hospital's schedule, not your body's. And maybe the scariest part is that most of us don't even question it. We think it's normal, standard, safe, but it wasn't designed that way for us. It was designed that way for them. Chapter 6, Flat on Our Backs, The Lie About Comfort. Here's the thing that still makes me shake my head. We've spent thousands of years figuring out how to make childbirth safer, more intuitive, more supportive, and somehow we ended up on our backs, literally. And I can't stop asking myself, how did we let that happen? It sounds like such a simple detail, right? The position you give birth in. But once you really sit with it, once you understand where that idea came from, it feels like a symbol for something so much bigger. A symbol of how a woman's body was taken from her, not just physically, but systemically. For most of history, women gave birth upright, squatting, kneeling, even standing if that's what their body told them to do. And it makes sense. Gravity helps, movement helps, breathing freely helps. And we know this because ancient carvings, paintings, and even cave art show it. Women supporting other women, midwives holding onto ropes or trees while mothers pushed. It was primal, but it worked. Birth was active. It was something a woman did not, something done to her. And then men came in. When François Morisot published his book recommending that women lie on their backs during labor, he said it was more convenient not for the woman, but for the doctor, because now he could see everything. He could sit comfortably between her legs and work like a technician. It wasn't about improving outcomes. It was about positioning, about access. And it was King Louis XIV who took it from a medical suggestion to a cultural mandate. He didn't like the idea of women giving birth on stools. It blocked his view. And yes, apparently he wanted a front row seat to the entire process. So naturally, if the king preferred women to give birth lying down well, everyone else followed. And just like that, women went from vertical to horizontal. But that change wasn't just physical, it was philosophical. Because when you lie a woman down, legs in the air, you're doing something deeper than changing her posture. You're taking away her power. You're turning her into a patient, a subject, an object to be worked on. And what started as a preference for royal entertainment slowly became standard procedure. By the 18th century, giving birth on your back was the expected norm in hospitals across Europe. And by the time modern medicine took hold in the United States, it was seen as the only safe way. But let me ask you something. Safe for who? Because studies now show that lying on your back is one of the least effective positions for labor. It narrows the pelvic opening. It increases the chance of tearing. It slows down contractions. It makes it harder for the baby to descend naturally. And yet it's still the default in most hospitals. Why? Because that position makes it easier for the doctor to operate, to control, to monitor, to reach for the tools. It's about their comfort, their workflow, their preferences, not yours. And the worst part, most women don't even know they have a choice. No one tells them that they're allowed to stand, or squat, or lean, or move at all. We've been taught that hospital birth is scientific, clean, modern, and therefore better. But in reality, it's rooted in convenience control and centuries of male-dominated medicine. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying hospitals are evil or that doctors don't save lives. Of course they do. But when you step back and look at the history of how childbirth changed, you can see the pattern so clearly. It was never just about safety, it was about power. And it makes you wonder how many other things about childbirth do we accept as normal just because someone powerful once said it should be that way. Because here's what I've learned, childbirth has always been complicated. But it didn't used to be so disconnected. It didn't used to be so clinical, so silent, so out of our hands, it used to be something shared, guided, witnessed, felt. And now in many places it's something women endure alone in fluorescent lit rooms strapped to machines being told when to push and when to stop. And when it's over, they're handed a baby and sent home. No processing, no recovery. Just a medical bill and maybe a few painkillers. So when people say things like, well, this is just how it's always been, I want to scream. No, it hasn't. It didn't start like this. It was made this way. Deliberately. And until we start talking about that, until we start unlearning the false comfort of lying down and recentering birth around the woman again, we're going to keep repeating the same patterns, the same losses, the same trauma. But here's the good news, more and more women are remembering. More midwives, doulas, and birthing advocates are pushing back. Some hospitals are offering upright birth options again. Birthing centers are giving choices. Some women are even giving birth in their homes on their terms. Because this isn't about going backward. It's about going home. Back to a place where birth belongs to the person doing the birthing. Not the doctor, not the hospital, you. Chapter 7. From Home to Hospital. The Sterile Takeover. I used to think hospitals were the safest place in the world. White walls, blinking monitors, people in scrubs, moving with purpose. It felt clean, controlled, like nothing bad could happen there because everything was being watched, tracked, managed. But the truth is, when it comes to childbirth, that control came at a cost. For most of human history, birth happened at home. It happened in bedrooms, in kitchens, in small village huts, surrounded by people the mother knew and trusted. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't always safe. But it was personal. Then around the late 1800s and early 1900s, everything started to shift. Hospitals were rising, science was booming, and there was this new obsession with clinical hygiene and modern medicine. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't all bad. Germ theory saved lives. Antiseptics changed everything. But somewhere in the middle of all that progress, something else happened. Birth got swept into the machine. It stopped being a family event and became a procedure. Doctors, who were now mostly men, began convincing society that childbirth was too dangerous to be handled by women at home. Midwives were called untrained, unscientific, even dirty. Campaigns painted them as relics of the past. And the solution: bring birth into hospitals, put it in the hands of professionals. And people believed it. I mean, who wouldn't want a cleaner, safer, more modern birth? But here's the thing they didn't say out loud. When women stepped into hospitals, they didn't just gain access to medicine, they lost their voice. They were told to lie down, to stay quiet, to let the professionals take over. And for many decades, that wasn't just implied, it was enforced. In the early 20th century, it was common for women to be given something called twilight sleep. Sounds peaceful, right? It wasn't. It was a combination of morphine and scopolamine designed to make women forget the pain of childbirth. Not stop, the pain just erased the memory of it. The drugs didn't numb the contractions, they just made women delirious, sometimes violent, often completely disconnected from their own bodies. Women would scream, thrash. Some had to be strapped down during labor, literally tied to beds. Others were left alone in padded rooms until the baby came. And when they woke up, they wouldn't remember anything. Not the birth, not the first cry, not even holding their child. It was like someone had stolen one of the most intimate, powerful moments of their lives and deleted it. All in the name of comfort. But really, it was about control. Because doctors didn't want emotional patients. They wanted quiet ones, manageable ones. Women who wouldn't question what was being done to them. Women who wouldn't demand to walk or move or push when their bodies told them to. And twilight sleep. It became trendy. Upper-class women, especially in the US and Europe, began requesting it. It was seen as progressive, civilized, a sign that you were a modern woman who trusted science more than superstition. But behind the curtain, things were dark. Babies were sometimes born groggy or struggling to breathe. Mothers suffered complications, hemorrhaging, trauma infections, and many never got to process what they'd gone through because no one talked about it. Birth wasn't just painful now, it was silent, and the silence was institutional. Hospitals had strict rules. Fathers weren't allowed in delivery rooms. Sometimes no one was. Women gave birth alone, attended by strangers under bright lights while heavily medicated or restrained. They weren't seen as people in a moment of transformation, they were treated like subjects on a table. And here's the heartbreaking part: many of them thought this was just the way it had to be. That if you wanted to survive childbirth, this was the price. And to be fair, hospitals did reduce maternal mortality in some cases. Clean tools, sterile techniques, emergency surgeries, they saved lives. But that didn't mean the system was kind, or humane, or even logical. There's one story I read that I'll never forget. It was the 1940s. A woman in New York described going into labor, being rushed into a hospital room and immediately sedated. The last thing she remembered was a nurse telling her, "Don't worry, you won't feel a thing." She woke up hours later, with stitches, sore limbs, and a baby she didn't remember delivering. No one explained what had happened. No one stayed to answer questions. She was just handed a child and expected to be grateful. But how do you connect with a moment that was stolen from you? How do you bond with a child when your memory begins after their first breath? That woman carried that loss with her for the rest of her life, not because of pain, but because of what she never got to feel. And she wasn't alone. Twilight sleep eventually fell out of favor, partly because of the side effects, partly because women started to fight back. In the 60s and 70s, the natural birth movement emerged. Women began questioning the system, asking for choices, asking to be awake, alert, present. But even now, echoes of that sterile takeover remain. Birthing rooms still feel more like operating theaters than places of life. Many hospitals still default to routines based on policy, not individual need. And too often, women are still treated like passengers in their own birth story. So when people talk about the rise of hospital births as progress, I think we need to be honest. It wasn't just about saving lives. It was about reshaping them in a way that erased intimacy, erased memory, erased the woman at the center of it all. Chapter 8. The bodies they didn't protect. There's a part of this story I can't tell without my chest tightening. Because when we talk about childbirth in hospitals, about how it became cold, clinical, and stripped of humanity, there's one group of women who suffered most and still do. Black women. Their pain wasn't just ignored, it was studied, used, and often discarded. And if that sentence makes you uncomfortable, it should. Because this isn't just some dark corner of history, this is the foundation of modern obstetrics. Let me take you back to the 1840s. Alabama, a man named Dr. J. Marion Sims. He's often referred to as the father of modern gynecology. You'll still see statues of him in medical textbooks. Some hospitals used to honor him. They said he revolutionized women's health. And in some ways, it's true, he invented surgical techniques for repairing vaginal fistulas, which are painful tears that can occur during childbirth. His procedures eventually helped thousands of women around the world. But the part they don't always tell you? He developed those techniques by experimenting repeatedly on enslaved black women, without anesthesia. Their names were Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsy. They were teenagers, enslaved, and they didn't get to say no. He operated on Anarcha over 30 times, and every time she screamed in pain, he recorded it like data. He said black women had a higher tolerance for pain, that they didn't feel it like white women did. That lie, that myth of black bodies being stronger, less sensitive, less human, didn't die with Sims. It got built into the system, into the textbooks, into the biases, into the hospital protocols that still shape care today. And before you think, well, that was a long time ago, let me ask you this. Why are black women in the United States today still 3 to 4 times more likely to die from childbirth-related causes than white women? 3 to 4 times. That's not biology. That's not coincidence. That's the system. And I've read so many stories. So many that sound like they belong in the past, but they don't. They're happening right now. There was Kira Johnson, a healthy 39-year-old black mother who checked into a prestigious hospital in Los Angeles to deliver her second son by C-section. Everything seemed fine at first, but after surgery, her husband Charles noticed she wasn't right. Her color was off. She was in pain. He told the staff again and again, begged for help. For 10 hours he kept asking, and for 10 hours they kept brushing him off. By the time they finally took her back into surgery, it was too late. Kira had been bleeding internally the whole time. She died. Right there in the place that was supposed to protect her. Her husband never got answers, just a death certificate. And her story isn't rare. In fact, it's disturbingly common. Black women are more likely to have their pain dismissed, their symptoms downplayed, their instincts ignored. Even when they're educated, even when they're insured, even when they do everything right. Serena Williams, one of the greatest athletes of all time, nearly died after giving birth because doctors didn't believe her when she said something was wrong. She had to demand tests to confirm what she already knew: she was having a pulmonary embolism, a blood clot in her lung. If Serena Williams had to fight to be heard, what does that say for the rest of us? What does that say for the women without fame, without cameras, without a platform? And it makes me think, how many voices have been silenced not by medicine, but by arrogance, by a refusal to listen? When we look at the numbers, when we listen to these stories, it's clear the system doesn't fail all women equally. It fails black women first, and hardest. And it goes beyond just statistics. It's in the small casual moments, the way a nurse raises an eyebrow when a black woman asks for pain relief. The way assumptions are made about drug use, about body size, about attitude. It's in the implicit bias that still lives in medical schools and hospital rooms. And unless we name it, nothing changes. Because the truth is, we can't talk about birth without talking about racism. We can't talk about maternal health without acknowledging the trauma that black women carry, not just in their bodies, but in their memories, in their communities, passed down like warning stories whispered across generations. Be careful. Don't let them ignore you. Speak louder. Be firm. Take someone with you. Because survival shouldn't require a strategy. It shouldn't depend on how well you self-advocate while in labor. But for black women, it often does. And while some progress is happening, more black doulas, more midwives, more awareness, it's not nearly enough. Not when the stories keep coming, not when the numbers won't budge, not when women are still dying because someone in power didn't think their pain was real. So when we look back on people like Sims, we have to stop calling them pioneers. We have to name what they were: abusers, exploiters, beneficiaries of a brutal system that traded black suffering for white progress. And we have to honor the women who never got to tell their stories, the ones who were cut open, silenced, and forgotten, because they built this system with their bodies. And the least we can do is remember. Chapter 9. The crisis we pretend isn't happening. You'd think, with all the technology we have now, 3D ultrasounds, fetal monitors, advanced surgical techniques, that childbirth today would be safer than ever. But the truth, that illusion of safety, is cracking. Because right now, in one of the wealthiest countries in the world, the United States, we're facing a maternal health crisis. And we barely talk about it. We have iPhones that can track our ovulation, smartwatches that count our contractions, and yet more women are dying from childbirth-related causes now than they were decades ago. Let that sink in. According to the CDC, maternal mortality in the US has actually increased in recent years. Not decreased, not stabilized, increased. And it's not just happening in small towns or rural areas. It's happening in big cities, in top-ranked hospitals, to women with insurance, education, and access. So what's going on? Why are we still losing mothers? The reasons are complex, but they all point to the same root: we've stopped listening to women. We treat pregnancy like a checklist. Blood pressure, good. Ultrasound, normal. Birth plan, filed. But somewhere in all that data, all that protocol, we forget that behind those numbers is a real person. A body that doesn't always follow the rules. A voice that's often drowned out by beeping machines and rotating staff. And when that voice says something doesn't feel right, we still don't take it seriously. I remember reading about Amber Rose Isaac, a 26-year-old teacher from New York. She was healthy, vibrant, glowing in her pregnancy photos. But toward the end of her pregnancy, she started complaining about intense fatigue, headaches, and strange symptoms. She suspected it was HELLP syndrome, a dangerous complication related to preeclampsia. She advocated for herself. She emailed her doctors. She pushed for answers. But they dismissed her. She died during an emergency C-section. Her partner Bruce was left holding their baby, grieving in a hospital hallway. That shouldn't happen. Not in 2020. Not to a woman who knew something was wrong and tried to speak up. And she's not the only one. So many of these stories start with the same sentence: I told them something felt off. And they end in silence. It's not just about race, though race plays a huge role. It's not just about class, though poverty magnifies the risk. It's about a system that treats childbirth like a factory process. You come in, you labor, you deliver, you leave. If you don't fit the mold, if your pain shows up differently, if your symptoms don't align with textbook definitions, if your instincts go against the flow, you're often ignored. And even when things go right on paper, so many women are still traumatized by what happens inside that delivery room. The pressure to induce before they're ready, the rush to perform C-sections without clear medical necessity, the dismissive tones, the lack of consent, the way nurses roll their eyes when a woman screams or cries or says she's scared. It's not just about survival anymore, it's about dignity, about being seen, heard, believed. Because birth isn't just a medical event, it's a memory. And the way a woman is treated during those hours can shape her entire life. Her sense of self, her ability to bond with her baby, her mental health for years to come. We have so much language around miracle of life, but we rarely talk about what happens when that miracle becomes a medical trauma. And postpartum, forget it. Once the baby's out, most women are sent home with a brochure and a 6-week follow-up appointment, if that. No check-ins on mental health. No real conversations about healing. No acknowledgement of the physical, emotional, and hormonal earthquake they just survived. And if something goes wrong, if a woman bleeds too much or passes clots or gets a fever, she's often told to wait and see, to drink water, to rest. Too many don't make it to their follow-up. Too many die from things that were entirely preventable. It's not a coincidence. It's not bad luck. It's a system that was never really designed to protect women in the first place and still hasn't caught up. But there's another side to this story, one that gives me hope. Because more and more women are starting to fight back. They're hiring doulas, midwives. They're switching providers mid-pregnancy when something feels off. They're showing up to appointments with partners, friends, witnesses. They're asking questions, recording conversations, demanding transparency, and they're building communities, online groups, local meetups, shared birth stories posted in raw, unfiltered detail, not to scare, but to prepare. Because knowledge isn't just power, it's protection. And I think that's what makes this whole conversation so emotional for me. We're not just talking about birth, we're talking about power, about who gets to be in the driver's seat, about whether we see pregnant people as full humans or just vessels for future life. So when someone says, well, at least the baby is healthy, I want to ask them, what about the mother? What about her health? Her voice, her memory of that day. Because if we keep pretending this crisis doesn't exist, more women will die. More children will grow up without mothers. More families will be shattered by preventable loss. And the worst part, we'll keep calling it rare. But it's not rare, it's just ignored. Chapter 10, After the Birth. The silence that follows. People think the story ends when the baby is born. They picture a clean hospital bed, a swaddled newborn, a tired but glowing mother smiling into the camera. But what they don't show you, what we almost never talk about, is what happens after. What happens when the visitors go home, when the nurses stop checking in, when the adrenaline wears off and you're left alone with a body that doesn't feel like yours anymore, and a mind that can't make sense of what just happened. No one prepares you for the silence. I remember thinking, why does it feel like I've survived something no one will acknowledge? It's not just physical recovery, though. That part is brutal enough. The tearing the stitches, the bleeding that lasts for weeks, the sore breasts, the night sweats, the hair loss, the hormonal roller coaster that can make you sob uncontrollably at 2 a.m. over something as simple as a wet diaper. But even deeper than that is the emotional disorientation. Because if you had a traumatic birth, if you were ignored, dismissed, pressured into procedures you didn't consent to, or made to feel small in a moment that was supposed to be powerful, it changes you. And no one warns you about the grief that comes with that. Yes, grief. You can be overjoyed that your baby is safe and still mourn the birth experience you were robbed of. You can be grateful and traumatized at the same time. But try saying that out loud. People shut it down fast. At least the baby's healthy. You should be happy you're alive. Don't dwell on it, just focus on your baby. It's like your pain becomes inconvenient. Like once you're no longer pregnant, your feelings no longer matter. And so, most of us don't say anything. We just carry it. We carry the flashbacks of lying on a hospital bed, hearing someone say we're losing her. We carry the memory of begging for an epidural that never came. We carry the guilt for screaming, for bleeding too much, for being difficult. We carry the shame of not feeling instantly bonded with our baby, even though we were told we would. And worst of all, we carry it alone. Because postpartum trauma isn't part of the narrative we're given. Instead, we get Instagram posts about matching outfits and bouncing back. We get baby showers and milestone photos and diaper commercials with soft music and smiling moms. But we don't get space. We don't get time to process. We don't get told that birth trauma is real, that it's not just for people who had near-death experiences or emergency surgeries. It can happen in a room where nothing went technically wrong. It can happen in the way a nurse looked at you, in the way a doctor touched you without explaining what they were doing, in the way you were told to be quiet when all you wanted was someone to tell you it was okay to scream. And that's where the gaslighting begins. Because when you finally try to talk about it, people look at you like you're being dramatic, like maybe you're just hormonal, like maybe you're overreacting, like maybe it's all in your head. And slowly you start to wonder if it is. That's how trauma hides. It burrows deep. And for some women, it never really goes away. They struggle with postpartum depression, but no one screens them properly. They have panic attacks when they smell antiseptic or hear a baby cry. They avoid hospitals for years. They dread the idea of another pregnancy, not because they don't want another child, but because they can't survive another birth. And all of this, it could be prevented, or at the very least acknowledged. But instead, the system tells us to move on, to be grateful, to be quiet. And I can't help but wonder, what if we treated postpartum trauma the way we treat other forms of PTSD? What if we asked new mothers how they felt about their birth experience, not just whether they're breastfeeding or sleeping enough? What if we trained OBs and nurses to recognize trauma responses, not dismiss them? What if we created real space for women to speak and to be believed? Because the truth is, birth is one of the most vulnerable experiences a person can go through. And when it goes wrong, when it feels violent or violating or just deeply wrong, it doesn't just leave a mark. It can fracture something inside you. And unless someone helps you put the pieces back together, you walk around carrying the weight of that silence for the rest of your life. But here's what I've learned. There's power in telling the truth. There's healing in naming what happened. And there's strength, not weakness, in saying, that wasn't okay. That hurt me. That changed me. And when we speak those words out loud, we make space for someone else to say them too. That's how we start to rebuild. Not just for ourselves, but for the next generation of women. For our daughters, our friends, our sisters, our future selves. Because birth shouldn't break you. And if it does, you deserve more than silence. You deserve to be heard. Chapter 11. When We Speak, Reclaiming Our Stories. I think the first time I truly started healing was when I heard someone else say the words I'd been too scared to admit out loud. I didn't feel safe. It was so simple, so raw, so familiar. And hearing it, I felt something in my chest crack open. Because up until then, I'd been carrying everything alone, convinced that maybe I was the only one who felt broken after birth. That maybe I was weak, or too sensitive, or just ungrateful. But I wasn't. There were thousands of us. Women who had walked into hospitals full of hope and walked out feeling like ghosts of themselves. Women who had smiled for photos while secretly reliving the trauma behind their eyes. Women who were told everything went fine when nothing about it felt fine. And once I realized I wasn't alone, I couldn't stop looking. I found stories, articles, forums, support groups. I found birth trauma therapists and postpartum doulas and podcasts hosted by women who had been through the same fire and somehow were still standing. And I realized something. There's a quiet revolution happening. Not loud, not flashy, but steady. It's in the way more women are sharing their stories online, not the curated, airbrushed kind, but the real ones. The messy, bloody, complicated truths of what childbirth actually looks like. Not to scare people, but to prepare them, to validate them, to say, this is real and you are not crazy. It's in the way more partners are speaking up too. Men who watch the women they love be ignored, gaslit left to suffer in silence. They're not standing quietly in waiting rooms anymore. They're in the delivery room asking questions, taking notes, demanding accountability. And it's in the way Black women in particular are leading the charge, reclaiming birth, reclaiming their bodies, reclaiming the right to be treated with respect and care. Organizations like the Black Mamas Matter Alliance. Midwives like Jenny Joseph creating spaces that center dignity. Movements like Say Her Name and Not One More putting names and faces to the women lost in silence. This isn't just storytelling. It's survival. It's advocacy. It's justice. And the more I listen, the more I understand that reclaiming the narrative isn't just about healing ourselves, it's about preventing harm for the next woman. Because stories are how we remember, and remembering is how we change things. I think about the women who came before us who never got to share their stories, the ones who were drugged during birth and woke up with scars, the ones who were sterilized without consent, the ones who were told to be grateful when they were barely surviving. They didn't get the chance to speak. But we do, and we have to use it. That's why I keep talking, why I keep recording, why I keep writing down every detail even when it hurts. Because silence protects systems, not people. And if the system is going to change, it won't be because someone in power decided to finally care. It'll be because we refused to shut up. Because we kept posting, kept marching, kept voting for people who listened, kept demanding better training for doctors and better postpartum support and better education for the next generation. I know it won't happen overnight. Hospitals are slow to change. Protocols are hard to undo. And bias, especially the kind that's buried deep inside people who mean well, is the hardest thing of all to unearth. But still, I believe. I believe in the woman who files a complaint even when she's told not to bother. I believe in the midwife who challenges a doctor in the delivery room. I believe in the young mom who shares her birth story in a Facebook group and finally hears someone say, "Me too." That's how it starts. That's how it spreads. And the thing about stories is once they're told, they can't be taken back. They live, they echo, they grow. And eventually they reach the ears of someone who really needs them. Maybe it's a new mother sitting in her car sobbing after a 6-week checkup that felt more like a formality than care. Maybe it's a nurse fresh out of school who's still deciding what kind of caregiver she wants to be. Maybe it's a legislator staring at a bill about maternal health funding and suddenly understanding what's at stake. Or maybe it's a woman like me who thought she was the only one and now knows she's part of something bigger, something ancient, something rising, because birth has always been powerful, sacred, messy, human. And when we take it back, not just the process, but the story, we begin to rewrite the rules. We begin to build something that isn't rooted in fear or control, but in care, in truth, in us. And I think that's what this has all been about. Not just exposing a system, not just naming the pain, but reclaiming what was always ours. Our voice, our memory, our power. Chapter 12. What we carry, what we change. Sometimes when I sit quietly and think back through everything I've learned, every story, every statistic, every name, I feel this heaviness settle over me, like a weight I didn't choose but somehow became responsible for carrying. And maybe that's what this entire journey has been. Not just uncovering pain, but holding it, naming it, learning how to live alongside it without letting it swallow me whole. Because once you see how deep the cracks in the system run, you can't unsee it. You can't walk into a hospital the same way. You can't hear someone say, "She died during childbirth," and not ask, "Why was it preventable? Was she ignored?" You can't look at a glowing birth announcement and not wonder what story came before the smile in that photo. That awareness, it changes you. And yeah, sometimes it's overwhelming. But here's the thing I keep reminding myself: awareness is where everything begins. You can't fight what you don't see. You can't fix what you're not willing to face. And you can't create something better unless you first acknowledge what's broken. For so long, women's pain has been treated like background noise, something to endure, something expected, something inconvenient. But pain, especially the kind that's passed down from generation to generation, doesn't just disappear. It echoes. It echoes in the stories our mothers never told. It echoes in the hush that follows every "I had a traumatic birth" confession. It echoes in the faces of women who show up strong but carry a secret ache they've never put into words. And if you listen closely, you can feel those echoes stretching back centuries. Women who were silenced, dismissed, controlled, cut open without consent, bled dry in silence. So many of them never had a chance to reclaim their narrative, but we do. And that's where change begins, not always in grand gestures or sweeping reforms, but in the small moments of defiance. The woman who brings a doula into a hospital that doesn't welcome them. The nurse who pauses to say, "How are you feeling, really?" The partner who refuses to be quiet in the waiting room. The mother who tells her birth story honestly, even when it makes people uncomfortable. These are acts of resistance, and over time they become acts of revolution. Because every time someone speaks the truth, the system shakes a little. Every time someone refuses to accept that's just how it is, a crack forms in the foundation. And one day, maybe not in our lifetime, but maybe in our daughters, the system will look different. It'll be built around care, not control, around consent, not compliance, around people, not protocols. Until then, we keep pushing, we educate ourselves, we demand transparency, we share resources, we support birth workers who center humanity over efficiency. We fight for policies that protect postpartum health, not just for 6 weeks, but long after. We stop telling women to just be grateful and start asking what they need. And most of all, we stop measuring a successful birth by whether a baby is alive, and start measuring it by whether everyone came out whole. Because survival is not the same as safety. Discharge is not the same as healing. And silence is not the same as peace. So if you've been through it, if you've felt broken, dismissed, traumatized, I want you to know your story matters. It doesn't have to be polished or dramatic. It doesn't have to end with a grand victory. It just has to be yours. Tell it anyway. Write it. Say it. Whisper it to a friend. Shout it into the void. Turn it into something that can't be erased. Because there is power in the telling. There is strength in remembering. And there is healing in being heard. As for me, I'll keep telling these stories, even when they're hard, even when they hurt, even when people look away. Because I know there's someone out there who needs to hear it. Someone sitting in a hospital room right now wondering if what she's feeling is real. Someone scrolling through baby blogs trying to find herself in a sea of perfect stories. Someone who's tired of being told to move on. To her I say, you're not crazy. You're not weak. You're not alone. What happened to you matters. And the more we speak it out loud, the more we carve a space for truth. And maybe that truth will be the thing that finally changes everything. If you've made it this far, thank you for sitting with this pain, for listening to the stories that so many are still too afraid to tell. Birth should be powerful, sacred, human, but for too many, it's become a place of trauma, silence, and erasure. I don't have all the answers, but I do know this change starts with truth. And truth begins with a voice. If you or someone you love has experienced birth trauma, you're not alone. You're not imagining it. And you deserve to be heard. If this episode moved, you share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're new here, consider subscribing to True Crime Echoes, where we uncover the crimes that hide in plain sight. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, just because it's common doesn't mean it's right.